Hey everybody! I would say good morning. It's morning here on the East Coast, and early morning for Dan over on the West Coast. But it's night for our next guest. Jonathon Troughton is with us from Frameplay. Sorry, brain lost there. And so Jonathan's going to be talking to us about the evolution of advertising in games and where it goes from here, which is very important these days because, as we all know, if we don't make money doing this, we don't get to keep doing this. And Jonathan's going to talk about what advertising isn't a bad thing and how it can be done to, bring everybody together and benefit everyone. So with that, welcome to the event, Jonathon, and I will step out and let you roll.
Good morning, and thanks for having me here at the Indie Games Business Conference. And I will say, yes, that it is. The sun is just rising, so it is very early here. My name is Jonathon Troughton. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Frameplay, and we specialize in intrinsic advertising for the gaming industry. Today, I wanted to talk about, I guess, where advertising is going and talk about the growth of esports and advertising it, because I think most people at the moment, when they think of advertising, they think of esports and how that correlates to the industry. But really, we want to talk about, I guess, the growth of advertising in the general industry and the fact that esports alone is not going to be the driving factor for the advertising in the gaming industry, and also the size of this. So I think we'll kick off there because esports is always a popular topic with advertisers, because at this stage, it's the only thing that they really understand. It has a lot of correlations between the standard sports industry, which is mapped out, and they can understand how the teams and sponsorships generally work. There's a lot of content that is produced relative to that environment, and the broadcast and, I guess you would say, the digital measurement that they usually use for esports is very similar to what's already known. It's very similar to the sports industry in all the different formats. Obviously, there's a lot of sponsorships already going on there, but we want to point out why this growth in esports is also really good for the rest of the gaming industry when we talk about advertising. So esports popularity, obviously, everybody knows is growing. And if anyone's in this industry, something happened at the start of 2018. It just exploded. Gaming was everywhere. And I understand, given in the current environment that we're in, there's definitely been a spotlight that has been focused on not just esports, but gaming in general, with the unfortunate circumstances around COVID. However, it was actually 2018 where it really kicked off into a different gear. And these days, we tend to see something in the headlines every day about esports, whether it's new teams, whether it's new games that are coming into it, whether new teams are getting funding. There's always something that is going on right now. And obviously, since all the major sports seasons that have now been delayed, there's even been a growing focus on esports. Can brands, that those dollars be shifted that would typically go down in the traditional sports realm? Can they be shifted into esports? So there's been, I guess, with the global esports market, we've got, I'm not sure if you can see, but I think I can see what you have on the screen there. Now, there's a projections out where it's going to go. This obviously is going to be shifting relative to what is happening with the current coronavirus situation. There is going to be more. We're going to find it more of a catalyst effect and an accelerator towards the industry as a whole, but definitely towards esports. And I'll just go on to the next one. So obviously, we always talk about size of audiences, especially in the advertising industry, because that's really where their dollars are going. Investors, or the advertisers who are actually investing their advertising dollars in the spaces, whether it be esports or traditional forms, are really looking at getting a return. Now, different mediums obviously have different styles of return, but the esports audience in itself is growing and has been growing for some time. And just showing here, I guess you would say different games that are going on at the moment with the audience bases that typically follow them. And a lot of people understand that the esports audience, and this is relative to the industry, the esports audience is growing and it's growing at an exponential rate, but relative to the bigger gaming audience, the esports audience is still quite small. So as we go along this and we create more education around the space, we create more ability for advertisers and brands to actually get into the game, whether they're going in via an esports channel, or they're actually being fully part of the game via intrinsic methods, which we actually build, or if it's going into traditional forms that everybody's aware around, it's like interstitials and banners, then that's another way for the brands to get in there. But as it stands at the moment, in the US alone, there's 214 million adults, mostly adults, who are playing games. So from a brand's perspective, they're only just starting to understand now, and not just from a UA perspective, brands are starting to understand that the audience is actually of the age where it actually makes a difference. It actually means something. There's value there for them to engage in something that is not just a sponsorship deal from esports, but also how do we now get into the game? And how do we now be actually part of it, part of the experience? And what they're really recognizing now is that the actual gamer base is as important as esports, if not more so important, if you want to try and reach the scale that they're trying to reach. So currently, if you look at spending in the sectors, esports is sitting around just under 200 million in game in total. And when you look at this, it is actually accounting for a lot of UA, is around 11 billion. But then when you start to jump out of just that realm and you jump into digital display, you start talking about what budgets can actually be brought into these environments if it's done right, if you have the right mechanisms, the right controls, and the right technology to really support the digital display budgets being funneled into games. And at the end of the day, like my core belief, and I mean, I grew up as a gamer. I mean, die hard. To this day, it is my fallback and what I want to do when I want to relax. I never want to see these experiences diminished, but as a developer and even to enhance experiences, you really want to be able to pull some of this digital display budget into games. Now, this can be a substantial passive revenue. It can be an aggressive strategy to monetize, but this is the size of the digital display budget that is now becoming available to the games industry. Obviously, online media, there's more budget again, but it shifts in how it actually, I guess, integrates and works with gaming. Just jump on. So this is where we start to talk about the different styles of advertising and shifting away from just thinking about esports sponsorship, not just getting a logo on a t-shirt, not getting some sponsored gear or something like this, and not having just something like a placeholder over top of your screen. We actually want to talk about getting the creative relative to the game environment. So the creative is matching, it is symbiotic in its nature to the environment it's going in. We're talking about getting this into the game. So it's actually part of the experience. It is what the gamer gets to experience. It's not forced upon them. They can interact, they can view it, they can continue on their game as they would. There's no disruption to their game. And whether that be it can be video, whether it can be still images, or it can be animated images. And we're moving towards objects. And we are very cognizant of the barriers that come along with objects and customization for individual developers, because what we're trying to do is create extra revenue, create a greater experience, but we don't want to pile on additional work. And I know how all of us in our development queues and our sprint cycles, we have to go to battle every time we need to get something else added into that sprint. So we're not trying to make your lives harder. We're trying to make them easier and actually show a clear reason why you would be using something like this. And our technology supports the fully immersed pieces of creative. So I'll jump on to the next one. And this is where we start talking about with the technology we're doing. If you refer back to, I guess, the comment I made around the size of the display budget and how big it is and how we can actually bring that into the gaming space and why. You can't just pull a piece of creative into a game. You can't go off your standard IAB. It doesn't work that way. The advertising industry also needs to learn that these game environments are pretty much sacred. Like we want to maintain the experience. We want to maintain the creative integrity the developer had when they were building this game. So they need to understand the environment, but they also need to make sure that it's brand safe relative to them. So there needs to be a lot of different controls, and we build all of this in the background. But from a developer perspective, you need to understand this as well. To, I guess, for it to be mutual, you need to understand that the brands do have these requirements around brand safety. They have, I guess, a lot of requirements around measurement and transparency, and it's about building trust. So as we go forward here, we're really trying to shepherd the game developer and the advertiser through this corridor to make sure that they understand that there's important points to both parties here that really need to be adhered to. And that's we really take that on as being part of our job. Okay, so transparency and measurement in the ad industry are really fundamental, and I don't think we typically talk about those enough. Developers need to understand that without these sorts of things, there is really no sort of investment from the advertising space. And we focus on different things here. So we primarily focus on contextual targeting. Now, whether that be something, I think the examples up here, the genre, game rating, age, sex, geo, these are basic fundamental elements of contextual targeting. We obviously take a lot more to actually build a profile so the advertisers understand that the environment that they're going into and that they can really target the types of creative. Our system will then align the stylization of that creative relative to the environment that it's going in. But then beyond that, you start going to the behavioral targeting. And as everybody knows, the recent developments with IDFA and the challenges that come with that, and it's likely that Google is going to follow suit and is going to do something similar. But there's still things like system IDs and IPs and emails, and everybody's cognizant with the things that happened in the past with elements around gamer privacy. And we take that at the utmost importance. We 100% want to make sure that we don't have any issues with any privacy. I think I skipped a slide as well. No. And that's sort of where we go into, I guess you'd say, each of the individual elements here. So the impression verification, understanding when a piece of creative has actually been delivered into these environments. Now, whether or not this is going through anything like Google integrations or going into different various platforms in the background to actually confirm that this stuff has been delivered. When we've got audience verification, that is actually just making sure it is being delivered to somebody that was in line with the profiles that the advertiser intended that creative to go to. We spoke about brand safety, brand lift, to understand the differences actually being made to the advertiser when they make this investment. What's my ROI? What are we actually getting out of this? It's not just deliver and that's good enough, because if they're spending the money that we want to see come into this industry and actually uplift it and set it in the right direction where ad monetization through free-to-play mechanics is really profitable for everybody, not just your major studios. So things like brand lift are very important. And obviously, mentioned before, the brand safety. Then we move into viewability. So viewability is really in depth for the advertiser to understand what the gamer saw, how they saw it, where they saw it, how big was it, how long they saw it, all of these elements, plus a ton more, to actually give credence and validation and value to the advertiser. Now, this is what us as developers or game developers need to understand, that these are all really important factors to the advertiser. At the end of the day, we do want them to be investing in our medium. So we need to understand that these are really important to them. And it's no longer for them with the viewability space. It's not just for the game developers to do this. There is a lot of onus on the advertisers to learn and understand that this is no longer a 2D environment like web. These are 3D environments. And even though we do go into 2D games as well, these are 3D environments, and we do provide the tools for the advertisers to completely understand what is happening in one of these 3D environments. So there's a learning portion for both the advertisers and a learning portion for the game developers as well. And this sort of takes me back into when I guess we're talking about the performance metrics, because everybody starts thinking around, okay, well, these environments don't have a click. And of course they don't have a click, because we're not going to be clicking on anything in these environments. We don't want to be tricking people to exit the experience. We want them to stay inside that game experience. We want them to actually enjoy themselves. We want them to be retained. You're all thinking about retention ratio. So we need to make sure that we build this into the core loop mechanics to make sure that that retention stays in there. So there is no clicking. However, how do we provide that ability or that accountability, verification, and attribution for the brand advertisers? That's on us. We build this into the technology so that can be done without there being a click. I'll go on to the next one. Video game developers and players should expect ads. Okay. And they should expect measurement methods. Now, with this, we really deploying a lot of time and resources and energy into making sure that these back-end systems are doing all of this for you, so we don't actually expect you to do any of the work and changing any of your game flows or design flows to actually accomplish these measurement and viewability. We build this all into our technology because, as we always say, the technology or the experience or the ad creative or the ad should never interrupt or interfere with the experience, and it should just be more of a complementary effect. And so what do we need to get this right? And what do we need from, I guess, game developers? What do we need from advertisers? To get this right, there is really learning. Back to my original point on both sides. The in-game advertising inside the game really requires a new generation of measurement. And that is what we're providing. That's what we're building. That's what we're always listening to the industry. It's what we listen to you for, to find and understand better ways to enhance, better ways to optimize and profile our systems to make sure that they do run better on all platforms. If you pick if any of these companies that are currently doing this, we always like to sort of ask, like, how are they increasing the experience for you and the gamers? How are they helping you and assisting you with moving forward and changing the way you can actually build your titles, changing the way you can, I guess, create and develop and chase what actually the idea and creative direction and dream you had for that title. Okay, so the key takeaways that I really want to, I guess, drive down here create a well-produced content that advertisers value. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I think that's always in in your mind as you're building a game. You're really building an experience. You're actually building out what you envisaged, what your creative designs, dreams were. So as brands are looking at these things, they're always looking at what's the experience that comes along with this? Because if you think of any brand exposure, whether it be in traditional sports or when they're talking about esports, they're looking for emotional reaction. They're looking for experience. So the creative feel, the creative type, the immersion, everything, a well-produced content, and on both the advertiser side and the game side. So it's not just the game developers, owners to build a game that looks fantastic, but it's also on the advertiser to build creative that looks fantastic. Build creative that is, if you think of like circa reminiscent of the 60s, where they actually put a ton of effort into the message. It was witty, it was funny, it looked fantastic. It wasn't just Arial font in a photo. We don't want to see that. We want to see a progression in industry. We want to see really high quality ad creative coming into these game environments, because we want to see it reflect the amount of work that the game developer did to build the game. So we want to see them doing the same amount of work on the ad creative. We want to work with companies that know how to use the advertising industry's standard measures. And when you say that, and when we want to work with them, you guys should really want to work with them too, because if you don't partner with a company that understands all the requirements, the company doesn't measure up, it doesn't have all the key data points that are being fed out back to the advertisers and back into the investment dollars, they're not really going to understand the ROI. If they don't have the data, they don't have the signals, they're not going to be able to invest the amount of money that we all want to see from brands coming into this space. So creating really good creative on their part, and they're doing the investment, we want to make sure, and they want to make sure that they're getting all this information back. So make sure we're always, from a game developer perspective, make sure we're working with companies that understand what the standards are, or they're doing better. And I think the fundamental one, and this has always been just the underlying tone, is we do not want any of these monetization approaches. We do not want to take any of the advancements we're doing in the industry. We don't want to take any of the technology that we're building here. We do not want to disrupt the performance. We do not want to disrupt the experience, but the overall gameplay environment, it needs to be conducive. We are really about the players. We're players ourselves. We've got to think about this when we're actually building this technology and we're integrating this. We want to make sure that we're building the experience that keeps people happy in this environment. We don't want to see what's happened to elements of the web, where it's really just you're bombarded by things constantly popping up. You're bombarded by just the same thing everywhere. You really want to have a flowing, beautiful experience that we see in a lot of games, and a lot of the indie developers, a lot of even the major studios. We want to make sure that they all adhere to these principles, that when we bring these ads into the games, that they need to be done right, and they need to be done by people who actually care about the industry, who actually care about the player and the experience, that they're not just chasing a dollar. Because yes, the money is important for the developers, but if you don't have the players, you're not going to have anything. So, I mean, with that, I think that's about the end of my presentation. Jay, if you've got any questions.
Oh, we got several questions. Quick questions are good. So,
am I allowed coffee?
What's that? Oh, yes. Coffee? Trust me. I've got mine too. And yeah, I mean, one, I thought you were on the other side of the world. I didn't realize until we got started that you were in San Francisco. So
yeah, I'm in San Francisco. Yeah, like you can see the sun's coming up. So.
You were like, the sun's coming up, and I'm like, how the hell is that happening? You know, so so
2020, you know, like you expect this kind of stuff now.
Very true. Yeah, Joe won the shirt contest for the conference yesterday. She had a shirt on that said 2020 with 5 stars, and only one of them was filled in, and it said very bad, do not recommend. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it. So a lot of, I mean, ads have consistently gotten a bad rep from any number of parts of the industry, but those of us who do this for a living realize they're needed. It's an absolute key part of your revenue stream. It's just a matter of finding the right way to add them in, so you don't look like you're running an advert game. What are some of the best practices that you've seen on the development side for preparing a game to get these ads integrated properly?
Good question. So there's different approaches to this, because obviously once you have a title released, we work with titles that have already released. So it's around working with a developer and understanding the best placement. So there's obviously best placement practice. There's a lot of understanding around how you get the most out of, I guess you would say, a revenue practice, because there's a lot to do with viewability. When I mentioned before, viewability is fundamentally important to the advertising industry. So you need to understand where these things are placed, what the spatial positioning, what the draw distance from the camera is to the rendered piece of creative. So there's a lot of these things. We work with studios to understand what those are. Now, that's if it's already in production, it's already been released. Now, if you're in pre-release, or even better, if you are actually conceptualizing what your new game is going to be, we engage at that stage to actually express from best practices positions where you should be placing something, how it should be engaged, how big it should be, how long it should be on screen. We can engage at the early design phases of this. So you're not building a game around the advertising per se. However, you are being cognizant of it, that it is going to be a solid revenue stream, that is going to be something that you are going to rely on as one of your verticals of revenue. So it's not just IAP, but there is other things. So we can get it involved at different stages, but there is some best practices. We are continuously trying to improve those. And don't get me wrong, we're not saying at all that it's our way or the highway. We 100% give that flexibility to the developer. We really want them to make all the decisions. We give them the tools, we give them the guidelines, but we don't say it has to be here or it has to do this. You know, if you want it to be dynamic, or if you want it to be static, or if you're building a procedurally generated game, we have a multitude of approaches here, because we did approach it from a game developer's perspective, a gamer's perspective. We wanted to make sure that the technology gave you the capability and flexibility that was required.
So from the advertiser standpoint, and this is an area of the industry where I have like this much experience. Do they understand the intrinsic issues and, you know, the problems that go along with game development and esports, or is it just one of those, okay, you're just like, you're another place we can put an ad?
Yeah. So I would say when the conversation started around this, they 100% didn't understand, because they just thought it was, because at this point it was really esports was the thing that was making the noise in the industry. And for them, esports is an extension of traditional sports, and traditional sports to them has limited measurement. It has just its basic fundamentals, and they understood that. You know, these have been the standards that have been around for 30 years, 40 years. So that's what they tried to pigeonhole it and say, this is what it's going to be. But they didn't necessarily understand in the beginning, and they are now. They are starting to shift. And obviously with the, I guess you would say, environment that we have resulting from the coronavirus, they are far more open to understanding these environments, because they're realizing, like, oh my God, you mean to tell me that there's over 2.5 billion people playing games? Wait a minute. And the average age is 34. How did this get past us? How are people spending as much time playing games as they are watching digital video online? And why is there such a big gap there? That's insane. So it's actually nice to be part of the industry when there's this big shift and revolution that's going on, especially on the ad side, but the game side, and being able to provide the value that I can pull from the advertising industry, give them value as well, but pull those dollars into the game space, because it is something I love.
So one of the big problems with esports is it's completely controlled by like 5 games. It's either Fortnite, completely Overwatch,
CS:GO.
yeah,
Yeah.
or League of Legends, and I can see how an advertiser can wrap their head around a shooter. It's like, okay, I'm running through a city. Cities might have ads to place. How do they wrap their heads around League of Legends? It's like, where do you where do you put your normal looking ad?
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing, like, we're not saying that intrinsic works on everything. And I do not want to be forcing this down the throat of any developers thinking, well, I have to monetize with this now because it's what everybody's doing. No, like if you're building a game that makes no sense for there to be an intrinsic ad system in there, I'm not trying to force this on you, but this is, it does fit a lot. So it's not just your shooters. There's a ton of different categorization, whether it be racing, sports. A lot of casual can actually have this in instead of having different variants of interstitial. But if it's a fantasy game and it's like 2,000 years ago, I don't know. I don't really want to see developers trying to push that in. It's not my wish. And like I said, this is not just for $1. This is to enhance and give more options to game developers to enhance the experience for players. But yeah, there is, I'm not going to say who, but there obviously is a large studio who's like, you know what, we're going to put banners in
everywhere.
Yeah, we're going to put our banners in our competitive sports now. So yeah, no, it's
but
not.
I mean, it can still be done, through menus and things like that.
Yeah.
The leaderboard at the end, you don't necessarily have to brand that middle tower as the MasterCard tower, and now you've got to take it down.
Well, you mean the Eye of Voldemort, basically?
Yeah, exactly.
Just have the MasterCard logo.
You kind of have to think through.
Sorry, MasterCard, I didn't mean to throw that on you.
But so, I mean, when I see all, and this is probably going to be some trouble somewhere, but I'm going to say it anyway because I don't care. When I see all of this money getting thrown into eSports, to me, the correlation that we've even seen recently is with Universal and AMC theaters. So Universal, somebody over there had the nerve and the guts to say, look, nobody's going to theaters. Let's launch Trolls World Tour at home for $20 that you can rent, for 3 days, and we're just going to have to skip it. And AMC lost their mind, and they were like, well, you're never playing another Universal movie in our theaters. And it was just all of this. And I read it and I looked at my wife and I went, does AMC understand where their content comes from? Because it's not like they're making their own movies. They have to rely on this. And we see so much esports revolve around these, 4 or 5 titles. And I talk to developers every day and they're like, we're building this for esports. How do the studios and the companies that aren't making Overwatch and League of Legends and Dota and, all of the core games, how do they tap into that, from the advertising side? Because they don't have all of
It's a good point. It's actually a very good point. And when you look at the revenue when you look at the sponsorships that are going into esports at the moment, it's not your traditional. And I can tell you, like, I know of a lot of stuff that is pulling back there because they're not getting the information, the details that they need, the data that they need from esports, because the size of the market is still, it's not at the scale that traditional sports are at. And even though it is filling a gap at the moment, it's not that scale that traditional sports are at. But the dollars that are going into it still aren't quite the same, but they're still fairly high. So there's a bit of confusion from the advertiser side about how to get into gaming and how to get into that space. Because when you're saying if they're building titles, they're building new titles that are targeted towards esports, you're right, because they are not one of the major 5. They're going to struggle to find your major dollars that are coming into it. And they will definitely get all the traditional ones that you would in any sort of up and coming esports title, which is mainly PC hardware providers, whether it be peripherals or something like this, they always go because they just, they're friendly to everybody. I love them because they're just like, you know what, you're helping gaming, we're going to help you. It doesn't matter what you build, we're still going to help you. So I think that's fantastic. So, but you're not going to get that major dollars, and that's what they're really looking for. You're not going to get that without the big audience, the big press, and a lot of times people forget that the big audience and big press that have gone to a lot of these major five for esports doesn't necessarily mean that the people watching them or the people playing those titles are the people who are spending in those brands that are actually sponsoring it, because they don't have the data to even understand what the correlation between those profiles are and what the even like the viewership, where they're spending, what they're doing, what's the performance of this. So this is where I'd say, like, if you are building an esports based title or building it towards that, intrinsic ads are definitely something that you can start getting this brand dollars into your title very easily. So you're monetizing off the player base, and eventually you're going to be monetizing off streams and so forth as well. But then when they do that, if you're thinking around this, like I've said during the presentation, you need to start thinking about brand safety. So what are you building? And I can say for a start, like, anything to do with violent shooters. And I mean, my definition of violent, if I play Counter-Strike, I would just say that's competitive gameplay now. I wouldn't even say that's violent shooter. But my perspective on that is different to a lot.
Aside from the fact that you're shooting terrorists, I mean,
but a lot of brand safety guidelines, they'll say, well, no, it's still violent, so we can't put something in there. So just keep in mind that if you are building a shooter as a competitive gameplay, that 50% of brands immediately won't go in there just because it is that style. However, if you're thinking of anything in competitive sports, you're thinking of anything in racing, it's casual, funny, and you're converting that into an esports title, or it's a competitive play, you'll almost have entire brand support. You need to understand who your player base is, and this is where we provide the tools to actually understand who your player base is. And I'm not just saying we had 50,000, 100,000 DAU, and we think they're from these 5 regions. You need to have the data to go back, and this is our job. You need to have that data, and we go back and we say, once you've implemented our tools, we can say, this is what it is worth, this is why, this is who they are, this is where they go, this is what they do. We don't know who they are individually. However, we can provide a picture to these brands like, yes, you are going to get ROI in this. Yes, you are going to get value. And that's how you funnel that money into those games that are up and coming.
So Oblitus Games has a good question. And so how does this factor in to events? So, I mean, obviously you've got these core events that happen per game, but you've got things like Evo, which incorporate multiple games into one big, gigantic, fighting game competition. How do advertisers look at that like it's just a regular sporting event, or how does that differ?
It depends on where it's being shown as well. Like I'm seeing here in that question, like relative to the MMA and UFC, these sorts of things are interesting as well. And I imagine we're not talking about licensed property, because licensed property is usually something entirely in its own. Say, for instance, if you were doing the UFC titles that EA does, if you're doing anything like Madden or NHL, they're licensed. That the deal was done at the start of the season. They can't show anything in the game that's not even being done in the season because it's already been agreed upon. So you can't really be putting anything in there. Now, if these games are sporting and they've been mashed up and it's a bunch of different things in there, and I got to say, I'm not familiar with Evo, but
it's huge.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm in that categorization of I'm in the 50% category where I like playing PUBG, Call of Duty, and then take me into Command and Conquer and Age of Empires or something like that. So I can sit there and play Command and Conquer Generals for hours. But as far as games go, when you start talking about these dollars that are coming into it, I wouldn't say it's a case-by-case basis. There's definitely some best practices around where the ads can go, what types of brand safety requirements are in there. And I mean, if somebody has a question relative to putting something in, I'd encourage you to reach out, and we'd be more than happy to step you through how and why and where things could be done and why it would be done in that manner.
So I'll give you one of the reasons why Evo is an interesting event. And so one of it, let me see if I can put this in perspective. Imagine there is a, multi-time a year, huge live event. I mean, it just finished up at Mandalay Bay in Vegas. But instead of saying, okay, this is the Dota World Championships or this is the CSGO World Championships, it was like, we're doing an event and it's shooters. It covers, everything from Fortnite to CSGO to Overwatch.
Okay, so Evo is more of you call it a conference. It's an eSports conference.
For lack of a better word. But here's the thing. It's like they bring in, I didn't see what their lineup was this year until just now. So yeah, Oblitus, appreciate that. They don't just focus on the big games. They have indie games that are featured. So they had them fighting herds, which I'll admit.
Street Fighter. Street Fighter has a huge following in this space.
Yeah. And they had a Skullgirls competition, which is a major indie event. So the part of my frustration, and it's not just with advertising companies, it's with all different kinds of companies that come in from outside of our little sphere. Yeah. It's that they immediately look at, okay, I saw that on the news. We need to advertise in that. Is there awareness for stuff like this? I mean,
no, there's not. That's exactly driving back to the problem that I talk about and we talk about every day. When we're saying you're going to go into, you build out saying they want to do a deployment or an insertion, and they're going into whatever. We like to encourage them to not look at titles, but look at genres and verticals. And if they want to be in these verticals or categorization, then that's where they should be going. You shouldn't just be thinking, I know my kid plays Fortnite and I've seen it on TV, so Fortnite's the one it goes into. But Fortnite, relatively to this global scale and size, relatively to all the different categories that are out there, audiences, that's not just where you should be. Yeah, sure, you can go to Fortnite, and if you have the spare 20, 30 million to put into one event for one day, go for it. But you're not going to get the ROI that you're expecting. Just be aware of this. But what we suggest is you should be looking at these other verticals, these other titles, the ones, because a lot of these firms, all these agencies, a lot of the big advertisers, I dare say not all of them are gamers. And they think it's still a 15-year-old boy in a basement. I've literally had that said to me. You've got to educate them. And that's on us. We are educating the industry that gaming in itself is as diverse as the entire human race. So please understand that you need to learn some more and that there is value in all these different corners of gaming.
Do you have a job opening for somebody to just go around to these different agencies and beat them with a baseball bat until they understand?
Well, see, I thought, until you added the beat with the baseball bat, I was like, actually, yes. But then you added that, and I was like, I don't think that was in the job description.
It's sales encouragement. That's what it, because it is. It's one of the things.
Is that a bonus? Is that a bonus? I'm not sure. I think it's a bonus.
I'll do it for free. It is. It's one of those things that I want to see. I started in this industry 25 years ago because I was a gamer, not because I knew the first thing about business. It was because I was a gamer, and I'm still a gamer. And I realized that to get to that next level and continue to grow like we have, we're going to need these advertisers. But at the same time, they need to understand us and yes. what happens in the industry. And so I've got 6 more questions and we don't even have time for them. So one, if you've got a question that we haven't got to, and I'm going to drop all my questions in chat as well and let Jonathon, parse through them. But
Or you can find me in PUBG or COD later. Like,
I stopped playing PUBG. There's too many freaking hackers. You know,
oh,
it's
you mean
bad.
it's not the bots that are pissing you off? Nah.
No, I can kill the bots. You know,
Come on, man. Come on.
that's
You
not
just
the
got
problem.
you got
It's
get a
idiots
good
that are
push through.
getting me through a wall. That's the ones that I have a problem with.
As long as you're playing first person, it's okay. They can't shoot. Well, I mean, they can, unless you've been killed by a frying pan from 500 meters away through a wall. Yes,
It's the
then
through
that's
the
the
wall
ones.
that gets me. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just like, what? I know all of these things happen in an evolution, and we
Mhm.
can't get advertisers to, immediately wake up and see what the problems are. But the two main things that cause problems for indie teams are discoverability and funding.
Mhm.
And if these companies would realize, not only what the opportunity is in games outside of, the big five, whatever, and I don't even know they're five. I just literally made up that number. But the ones that we always hear about,
It's about 10, but yeah.
it would be an absolute game changer as long as we don't go back to the old advert games, because nobody liked those,
No.
and we get it. But that's the
And they
mentality.
were weird. They were
They
really
are.
weird.
It's like you just literally slapped, But when it comes to, you brought up a good point about CS:GO being, violent versus not violent.
Mm.
Where do they tend to draw the line? Because
It's
when we
brand to
look,
brand, 100% brand to brand. They all have different policies, and like my personal opinion is on this. And I mean, I haven't been affected by it in any way, and they definitely have to be culturally sensitive, politically sensitive. So there's a lot of things, and sometimes it is just too hard for them internally to get executive support to take that risk and even understand that in the gaming space, as gamers, we see CSGO as being, it's just fun. Like, it's just, we're playing competitively. However, for someone who's not a gamer, all they see is a violent shooter. So we do need to understand both sides of the coin. I think with time, there will be more and more brands that are coming out of that 50% category for shooters, and they'll be moving more into it's accepting that, understand it's a game space. But we're in a learning curve, and that's very much on us. Like, we are taking huge strides towards making sure that the brands understand that this space is gaming. This space is for gamers. You got to understand your audience. This is not just, how we feel like doing it, they'll have to deal with it. No, because gamers won't put up with that. The gamers will not play the game and go somewhere else. So
you just tanked your own medium. There you go.
Yeah. So this is why we're really like sitting there encouraging and understanding and learning and teaching these brands. And you'd be surprised, like Fortune 500s are totally coming around to this, like understanding and spending the time and investing the teams and efforts to actually, and bringing in and hiring people to understand what we're actually talking about here. Because again, it's not, I don't want to make this just a focus around shooters, because it's definitely not, but they need to understand I guess you'd say, gamers as a profile, or who people are, because gamers are massively diverse as well. And the same person generally sits in certain categories of games, whereas you don't see, like, I'm not going to go and play, well, personally, I don't play, PUBG, Call of Duty, and say, for instance, I do play Counter-Strike, Valorant I play as well. But then I'm not going to go and play League of Legends. Like, I tend to stick in my own lane. So if you want to actually hit certain people or hit certain buying groups, which have disposable income, whether they are younger, older, you're going to have to diversify into different verticals. So you're going to have to venture into the shooters. You're going to have to venture into racing. But if you do this, you go into the different categories, understanding you're getting different audience bases. And that doesn't just mean for PC. Obviously, mobile is the prevalence of that is massive. Mobile is huge. Like, we have a huge emphasis on mobile because we understand the audience and the shift, and that we're not just focusing on North America here, we're focusing on the world, because North America, or EMEA in Europe and say Australia, the devices are totally different to what we see in other regions of the world. So we want to make sure that we give an even balance, an even technology offering, and an even a voice for every player everywhere. And these brands actually value that everywhere.
So just to watch the advertisers' heads explode, have you
That's pretty funny.
The Farm Simulator eSports League in Europe? I mean,
yeah.
This is what I don't get, and it's I will absolutely take that job of going to the advertising companies and beating them with a baseball bat until they understand our industry. That's part of the reason that so many gamers are against ads in games.
Yeah.
It's because they're done so poorly. And it takes companies doing like what you all are doing to say, okay, slow down. We're not just going to slap a MasterCard logo anywhere we want to in the game. It has to be done, with an ounce of thought in it.
You have to care. You actually genuinely have to care, and that's the problem. A lot of people haven't. It's been purely about $1, and there's such a thing that you can care, and you can actually care about both sides and have a medium in the middle where they can actually have a good experience with a player. Because at the end of the day here, like, doesn't matter what gets developed. It seems to be developer and advertiser would be the ones who win, and the players are just the ones who get like railroaded. So you want to make sure that the player is fundamentally first and foremost, like, what's the experience? Is the experience good? Great, we're on the right track. Is the developer getting value from this? Yes, they are. Okay, fantastic. That means then the advertiser, if they're getting value, everybody's happy, but the player has to come first.
All right, one last question, and then we got to get ready. So for those of you out there, stick around, follow or like or whatever the correlation is on wherever you're watching. That way you'll get an update. This is our last day. We got some big events coming up. Alan Noon is next. He's the lead evangelist over at Epic, and he's going to be talking about best practices for your Epic Mega Grant application, which is a small $100 million initiative that Epic's doing, because apparently they have some game going on that makes them a ton of money.
Well, it's good they're giving back. That's one thing, like that. If they're making it and they're actually giving back to the developer community, that's fantastic. So I can really endorse that.
All right. So, and damn it, I already forgot what my question was. I had a good one. Crap. All right, I'm going to have to come up. I'll drop it in chat. I got not enough coffee in me yet, and I can't remember what that question was that I had. So anyway, all right. Okay, yeah, I got it now. How have advertisers viewed streaming so far outside of, traditional, I'm either going to run an ad in Twitch or I'm going to, send somebody a video, because you literally have more people watching these games being played than in some cases are even playing them.
That is you break down the numbers, and I'll be blunt. You break down the numbers of the people playing them who are streaming them. Yes, very few. The number of people watching them, you may get globally 50, 100 million combined across multiple platforms. Well, there's 2.7 billion people playing every day for 15 minutes or more. Have a guess whether the majority of the dollars are going to go, regardless of how big they make that industry.
That's a good point. All right. Thank you so much, Jonathon, for getting up early and doing this. And I'll send you something offline. I'd love to have you and Carrie on the podcast later so we can keep this conversation going, because I love it. Like I said, this is something that I believe in, but I also believe it needs to be done right. But I believe that the people bringing it in need to understand what we go through. Yeah. We do. So yeah. Thank you very much. Do you have your contact info on that slide? I can't remember.
I'll just let people bombard you, and you can You can take care of it for
Yes.
me.
Send me the slide deck. We'll get it added. Jonathon is in our Discord, so go to discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. You can ask him questions there. We have a wonderful after session channel in there that you can hop into. And that's it. So we're going to log this one. We'll be back in roughly 5 minutes with Alan Noon from Epic. Thanks, everybody.